At 80, Jaclyn Smith has finally broken her silence. For decades she was the steady angel, graceful, unshaken, the one who stayed when others left. To fans she seemed above the drama. But behind the calm exterior was a story she never told. When Cheryl Ladd joined Charlie's Angels in the late 1970s, she was stepping into Farrah Fawcett's shadow, a role the press called impossible. To the world, Cheryl was the replacement, but Jaclyn saw something different, a young woman carrying the heaviest expectations television could place on anyone. For years, the tabloids painted their own picture: rivalry, jealousy, competition, and Jaclyn let the rumors stand. She stayed silent, year after year, even as fans wondered what truly happened between the two angels. Now at 80, Jaclyn has chosen to speak. What did she really think of Cheryl Ladd? Why did she remain silent for so long? And what truth has she finally revealed that left fans stunned? The set of Charlie's Angels had always been buzzing with energy, but the day Cheryl Ladd walked in, the atmosphere was different. Farrah Fawcett had just left after a single explosive season, and her departure left the studio in turmoil. The producers were desperate to keep ratings high, the press was circling with stories of discord, and fans were loudly insisting that Charlie's Angels would never be the same. For Jaclyn Smith, who had built her reputation on consistency and professionalism, the transition was unsettling. She remembered the early days with Farrah, the way the three original angels were photographed as though they had descended fully formed into stardom. Now with Cheryl walking onto the set, there was a new reality. The magic had to be rebuilt, and the burden of expectation was going to fall squarely on the newcomer. Cheryl was polite, nervous, and eager to prove herself. Jaclyn watched as she greeted crew members, her smile steady even as whispers filled the soundstage. Some doubted she could pull it off. Others thought audiences would never accept her. But Jaclyn saw the courage it took just to show up, to walk into a storm that wasn't of her making. In that moment she felt protective, not of the show's legacy, but of Cheryl as a woman stepping into an almost impossible role. What struck Jaclyn most in those first days was Cheryl's willingness to listen. Rather than demanding attention or trying to outshine anyone, Cheryl asked questions, took direction, and quietly observed how things worked. She carried herself not like a star, but like someone who knew she had to earn her place. To Jaclyn, that humility made her stand apart. It wasn't the kind of trait the tabloids valued, but it was one Jaclyn respected deeply. No matter how well Cheryl performed, she couldn't escape the shadow Farrah had left behind. Farrah was more than an actress. She was a cultural phenomenon. Her poster had sold millions, her hair had become iconic, and her brief time on the show had already defined the way fans thought about Charlie's Angels. When Cheryl appeared on screen, many viewers refused to see her for who she was. Letters poured into the studio, some welcoming her, but many comparing her unfairly to Farrah. The press called her the replacement angel, as if her entire identity was tied to someone else's absence. It was a label that followed her through interviews, appearances, even magazine covers. Jaclyn, who had watched the transition up close, now admits how difficult it was for Cheryl. She wasn't just competing with another actress. She was competing with a memory, an image, an idealized version of Farrah that no one could match. The show needed Cheryl to succeed, but much of the world seemed determined to remind her she wasn't Farrah. And yet, Cheryl didn't flinch. She poured herself into the role of Chris Monroe, bringing a lighter, more approachable energy that balanced Jaclyn's elegance and Kate Jackson's sharp intelligence. Slowly, she began to win over audiences, not by trying to be Farrah, but by being authentically herself. Jaclyn remembers watching Cheryl handle the pressure with grace. When critics tried to bait her into comparisons, she smiled and deflected. When fans questioned her place, she kept working. That quiet strength left an impression on Jaclyn, though she never said it publicly at the time. Today she admits that Cheryl's persistence saved the show. Without her resilience, Charlie's Angels might have collapsed under the weight of its own fame. On television, Charlie's Angels looked glamorous, stylish women solving crimes, laughing between adventures, and always perfectly composed. Behind the cameras, the reality was harsher. Filming was grueling, with long days that stretched into nights. Scenes were reshot until the lighting was perfect, and storylines were constantly adjusted to chase ratings. For Cheryl, it was an immediate trial by fire. Jaclyn recalls Cheryl arriving on set before sunrise, still smiling as makeup artists worked to cover fatigue. The hours wore everyone down, but Cheryl had the added pressure of proving she belonged. Producers hovered, scrutinizing her performance, as if any small mistake could justify the decision to replace her. The crew noticed Cheryl's effort. She never complained, even when exhaustion set in. Between takes, she would quietly sit with her script, running lines, determined to get it right. Jaclyn, who had endured her own share of long nights, recognized the toll it took. She remembers moments when Cheryl's laughter on screen was followed by silence off-set, her face betraying the cost of constant scrutiny. The tabloids never printed those truths. They were more interested in gossip about supposed rivalries or exaggerated tensions. What fans didn't see was how Jaclyn often offered quiet encouragement, a reassuring word, a shared smile, a reminder that Cheryl wasn't alone. Those small gestures built trust, even if they were never spoken about publicly. Looking back now, Jaclyn admits that the bond they shared wasn't built in moments of glamour, but in the unglamorous grind of television production. It was forged in exhaustion, in the silent acknowledgement of what it meant to survive in a business that demanded perfection. And this, Jaclyn says at 80, is the truth fans never saw. Behind the glitter of Charlie's Angels, Cheryl Ladd wasn't just an actress filling in for a star who had left. She was a woman carrying the weight of impossible expectations, and carrying them with grace. The more Cheryl settled into her role, the more the tabloids tried to stir tension. To the outside world, two glamorous women working side by side was never enough. There had to be a feud. Magazine covers blared with headlines suggesting jealousy between Jaclyn and Cheryl. Stories circulated of icy stares, stolen lines, or producers playing favorites. Jaclyn never fueled the stories, but she also never contradicted them. Looking back, she admits her silence may have allowed the rumors to grow louder than the truth. The reality, she says now, was far more ordinary and far more human. There were long days when everyone was tired, moments of creative disagreements, and the usual frustrations of television. But there was no grand rivalry. The press, however, thrived on painting women as competitors rather than collaborators. Jaclyn and Cheryl were constantly asked in interviews about each other, as though their talent couldn't stand without comparison. Reporters leaned in, hungry for signs of jealousy. When neither woman gave them what they wanted, they invented stories instead. Jaclyn remembers watching Cheryl bear the brunt of it. Because Cheryl was the newcomer, she was portrayed as the interloper, the one trying to replace what fans had lost. It was a role Cheryl never asked for, yet she had to wear it in every public appearance. And Jaclyn, balancing her own career demands, often stood quietly beside her, offering support privately rather than defending her publicly. At 80, Jaclyn reflects on why she kept silent. Part of it was self-preservation. The entertainment industry rewarded stars who avoided controversy. Speaking out against the media machine rarely changed the story. Another part was her personality. She had always been cautious with her words, protective of her privacy. Yet she knows now that the silence had consequences. Fans came to believe the rivalry narrative, even decades later. What she reveals now is simple but striking. The bond between her and Cheryl wasn't defined by conflict but by survival. They were women working under relentless pressure in an industry that measured them against impossible standards. They leaned on each other in small, unspoken ways. And while the world speculated about hostility, what really existed was a quiet respect, one Jaclyn regrets not making more visible. With time and distance, Jaclyn has begun to see Cheryl's presence on Charlie's Angels with clearer eyes. What stands out most is not the gossip, but the lessons Cheryl carried with her, lessons Jaclyn says she wishes she had acknowledged more openly. The first was resilience. Cheryl stepped into the harshest spotlight possible and never let it break her. She endured comparisons to Farrah, relentless press questions, and fan skepticism. Yet she showed up every day with professionalism. Jaclyn admired that strength, even if she rarely said it aloud. She now admits that Cheryl's ability to push through became a model of quiet endurance that influenced her own career. The second was humility. In a business where egos often dominated, Cheryl remained approachable. She listened, collaborated, and made others feel at ease. Jaclyn remembers countless moments when Cheryl's warmth diffused tension on set. That kind of generosity, Jaclyn now says, was as vital to the show's success as any script or camera angle. But with these lessons comes regret. Jaclyn wishes she had told Cheryl how much she valued her during those years. She wishes she had pushed back harder against the labels that reduced Cheryl to a replacement. Silence had been her habit, a way to avoid confrontation, yet it left unspoken truths hanging between them. At 80, those regrets weigh differently. Jaclyn reflects on how fleeting the years of Charlie's Angels truly were, how quickly the show came and went, and how often people assumed the women working on it were just characters rather than people with their own private struggles. What she now shares is not just admiration for Cheryl, but acknowledgement of her own missed chances, the words she never said, the defenses she never voiced. These confessions resonate because they peel back the polished image of Charlie's Angels. Fans saw Jaclyn and Cheryl as icons, but behind the scenes they were women navigating exhaustion, expectations, and the constant judgment of the public eye. Jaclyn's honesty at 80 reframes the story. It wasn't just about who was on top or who was the star. It was about two women learning, leaning, and sometimes missing the chance to truly tell each other what they meant. That, she admits, is the truth that lingers. And it is why speaking now matters. Because for Jaclyn, it is no longer about image or career. It is about legacy, gratitude, and finally giving Cheryl the credit she always deserved. When Charlie's Angels ended in 1981, many assumed the cast would scatter and rarely cross paths again. For Jaclyn Smith, the years that followed were filled with reinvention, television movies, fashion ventures, and motherhood. For Cheryl Ladd, the challenge was even sharper. She had entered Hollywood as the replacement angel, but now had to prove she was more than a single role. The public often imagined the women drifted apart, yet Jaclyn recalls moments that kept them connected long after the cameras stopped rolling. There were quiet phone calls of encouragement, holiday cards exchanged when life grew busy, and brief reunions at industry events. Their lives had diverged, but the shared experience of Charlie's Angels created a bond that never quite disappeared. Cheryl built her own career, starring in films, recording albums, and later making her mark in television once again. Jaclyn admired her persistence. It wasn't easy to step out from under the weight of a cultural juggernaut, but Cheryl did it with the same grace she had shown on the Angels set. She proved to the industry, and to herself, that she was far more than a footnote in someone else's story. Jaclyn admits now that she often watched Cheryl's progress from afar, proud yet regretful that she didn't say so more often. The entertainment business rarely gives women the space to celebrate each other openly. Praise is measured, friendships are kept private, and the idea of women supporting women is often overshadowed by fabricated rivalries. Looking back, Jaclyn wishes she had been louder in her support. What endured most between them, however, was respect. In the decades after Charlie's Angels, Jaclyn saw Cheryl as a survivor, someone who had faced one of the toughest roles in television history and carved out her own identity anyway. The gossip faded, the headlines grew old, but Cheryl's resilience remained. And that, Jaclyn insists today, is the part of the story fans never fully understood. So why speak now? Why, after decades of silence, has Jaclyn finally chosen to open up about Cheryl Ladd? Part of the answer lies in age itself. At 80, Jaclyn has nothing left to prove. Her career stands on its own, her legacy secured as the only angel who stayed through the show's entire run. But what weighs heavier with time is not what she achieved, but what she left unsaid. Jaclyn explains that as the years passed, she realized how much of Cheryl's contribution had been overlooked. The narrative of Charlie's Angels always centered on Farrah Fawcett's departure, on the glamour of the original trio. But without Cheryl, the show would never have survived. She carried the weight of expectation, softened the blow of Farrah's absence, and kept the series alive long enough to become a true cultural landmark. That contribution, Jaclyn insists, deserves recognition. There is also a personal reason. As Jaclyn reflects on her life, she admits she regrets not standing up louder for Cheryl when it mattered most. Her natural instinct had always been to remain quiet, to avoid controversy. But silence can leave wounds, not only for the person enduring it, but for the one who stays mute. Speaking now is Jaclyn's way of correcting the record, of saying publicly what she held privately for too long. She also knows the fans deserve the truth. For decades they were told stories of rivalry, jealousy, and division, but Jaclyn wants them to know the reality was different, that the bond between her and Cheryl was not defined by hostility but by mutual respect and quiet strength. By breaking her silence now, she offers closure, not just for herself, but for the millions who grew up watching the Angels and wondering what really happened behind the scenes. And perhaps most importantly, she wants Cheryl to be remembered as she truly was. Not as a replacement, but as an angel in her own right. At 80, Jaclyn sees the value in giving credit, in honoring those who stood beside her, and in setting the story straight before time steals the chance to do so. Jaclyn Smith's words today reveal more than a behind-the-scenes truth. They reveal a woman looking back at her life with honesty, gratitude, and regret. For years, the silence allowed myths to grow. Stories of rivalry, whispers of competition, tales that diminished Cheryl Ladd's real contribution. But at 80, Jaclyn has chosen clarity over rumor. She describes Cheryl not as a replacement, but as the anchor who saved Charlie's Angels from collapse. She recalls her resilience, her humility, and the way she carried herself through relentless pressure, and she admits, with disarming honesty, the regret of not saying all this sooner. For fans, the confession is moving because it reframes a story that once seemed simple. It was never just about who left and who arrived. It was about two women navigating an unforgiving business, supporting each other in ways the public never saw, and building a legacy that endures nearly 50 years later. In finally breaking her silence, Jaclyn Smith gives Cheryl Ladd the recognition she always deserved, and in doing so she reminds us that the real story of Charlie's Angels was not rivalry, but resilience, not division, but sisterhood. For more emotional stories, check out this video.